Since 1965, the ACEC Life Health Trust has provided innovative healthcare benefits and services to ACEC member firms. We offer a variety of benefits to meet the unique needs of your firm, including fully insured, level funded, stop loss, and ancillary products. Visit our website at aceclifehealthtrust.com to learn more about our affordable employee benefit options for ACEC member firms, backed by the financial strength of the ACEC Life Health Trust.
Hello, and welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. My name is Diana Alexander, and I am your Director of Private Market Resources with ACEC, and I'm back with another monthly update on a specific private market. If you're following our monthly updates, we're aiming to provide members with market-specific insights, trends, and an economic outlook for each of our private markets. Last month, we interviewed Aaron Jodka, Director of Research for U.S. Capital Markets with Colliers in Boston, Massachusetts. And during that podcast, we focused on the life sciences sector specifically. And we discussed venture capital and NIH funding, as well as hot geographic areas that are poised to see the most robust growth in the future. If you missed that podcast, you could always catch a replay. And to ensure you don't miss another one, please make sure you subscribe to the Engineering Influence podcast, which can be found on our website at acec.org. Now, today, we will continue with our monthly update with a one-on-one interview with industry expert Danushka Nanayakkara, Assistant Vice President for Forecasting and Analysis at NAHB. Danushka, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for having me back again.
Yes, absolutely. So just really quick for our members, for those that are not familiar, NAHB is the National Association of Home Builders, and it's been referred to as the voice of America's housing industry. They represent the interests of home developers, builders, contractors, and other associated businesses. So if you are a part of our Land Development Coalition at ACEC, this podcast is for you. Danushka also oversees the activities of the forecasting and analysis section of the economics group at NAHB. This includes market analysis, industry surveys, and developing and maintaining national, regional, long-term, and remodeling expenditure forecasts. So pretty impressive. She also holds a bachelor's degree in economics and business administration from Otterbein University and a master's in applied economics from Johns Hopkins University. And a fun fact, Danushka was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and in her own words, an island paradise in the Indian Ocean, which I'm sure is where we all wished where we were right now.
Yep.
So the reason we're talking with Danushka is because it has been over a year since we looked at the latest housing update with her. And for those that recall, ACEC interviewed her in February of 2021. And I wanted to reshare with our listeners just briefly where the consensus of the housing market was at that time before we jump into forecasting with her. So the hot points were that the residential market was the hottest market in 2020 and 2021. There were ripple effects of a booming market that bled into community infrastructure, which included roadways, K through 12 schools, water, wastewater. There was a hint of a slowdown anticipated for 2022, which is where we are now. There also was the trend of geographic growth in the Sun Belt and migration from Western states into the mountains. And then finally, this demographic change and this growth of the millennial generation who now became, they're looking to buy their first family home. So Danushka, this market is getting a lot of attention right now and has been since COVID-19, frankly. So let's unpack this here for our members. So here's my first question. In 2021, when you met with ACEC last, the housing market was booming, but a slowdown was kind of hinted at in 2022. Was that accurate, do you think? And where are we headed now?
For once, I think it was accurate because not that we, anticipate how much things were going to change this year. It's the fact that, the 2020 and 2021 was extraordinary years in terms of home building, right? We had 13% growth in 2020, 2021 for single family starts. And 2022 is shaping up to be something different because we're actually talking about as if like we are in a housing recession right now, because all the indicators are pointing to a considerably slowdown at this point. So we are expecting single family housing to be a 13% decline this year, below 1 million. So it's very different because housing is a very interest rate sensitive industry. So we are seeing, the effects of the mortgage rates increasing at this point. And then, of course, the construction cost increases have been a huge issue since the pandemic. But I must say, though, that was single family. Multifamily has surprised us. Multifamily construction has been really strong. In 2021, the year ended at 21% over 2020 for multifamily. And we are expecting a further 17% increase for multifamily starts this year. So it's over, for the first time, over 500,000 units. It's like 550,000 units for multifamily construction, which is really, really strong. It's primarily driven by the low vacancy rates and the high rising rental rates. So that's what's keeping multifamily really strong. So single family slowdown, multifamily is strong, but taken together, we are expecting a housing decline for this year.
Okay. You mentioned inflation and interest rates, and in our current economy where we're kind of living quarter to quarter and watching what the GDP is going to do, and questions like, are we in a recession? You said in the next year, this is what we're looking at, but what changes have you seen even just the last few months in the housing sector that we should be aware of?
Oh, goodness. I think almost every housing indicator is showing signs of weaknesses, So I think the biggest thing is our flagship index, the NAHB Wells Fargo Housing Market Index, is down the last 8 months. And this week was the August number came out. It's at 49. So this is the first time since May 2020, the index has fallen below the key benchmark of 50. It's at 49. And also, we saw in the index, like when we get the survey results, that the buyer traffic number was at 32. It's the lowest level since April 2014. So, exception is, of course, the spring of 2020. But it's the lowest traffic number since April 2014. And also it showed that 19% of the builders are reducing the home prices in order to increase some of the sales or even limit the cancellations. So the median price reduction was at 5% for those, of the builders who are reporting such incentives. And get this, right? Almost 70% of the builders are saying it's the higher interest rates. That's the reason behind the housing demand, which is absolutely true, right? Buyers are very, very cautious right now. And we saw that the single family starts and permits are now both below 1 million annual pace. And, it came out this week as well. New home sales have plunged below a 600,000 unit pace, lowest level since October 2018. And then, of course, combined with existing and pending home sales, they're all showing a, picture of a weakening housing sector. So that's what has changed in the last few months. This is, earlier this year, it was completely different scenario, but things have rapidly changed at this point.
Yes, this is very interesting, and the data is extremely timely, it feels like. There was a piece earlier you had mentioned about cost of materials. So another hot topic in the housing market is supply chain and the cost of steel and lumber. So what can you tell us about that? Is that still persistent, as worse, getting better?
The lumber prices have gotten better compared to last summer. Last summer, it was over $1,500 per 1,000 board feet of lumber. The average has been, before the pandemic, around $350 to $500. So $1,500 is really high cost. But And also at the height, it was adding around $30,000 for a single family construction just because of the lumber impact. Right now, the lumber prices have fallen about half. So the impact is around $14,000 on a single family home just by the lumber. $14,000 is still a staggering cost increase, right? When you think of like, it's not just the lumber, it's steel, aluminum, copper, ready-mix concrete. Everything has increased. So all of these together. But one good thing is, the Canadian lumber tariffs have been reduced in half recently. So that should help with bringing the cost of lumber down further. So we are estimating, I think, the construction material cost will slow down to around only 12% as opposed to the 20% that we've seen last year.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question, and I'm going to use the B word, bubble. So if you were working in the home building industry in 2007 and 2009, and you remember what happened in the Great Recession and that bubble popping, the construction labor market was one thing that took a direct hit, right? So has the construction labor market in particular recovered from that recession? And what are the impacts on, that in the market now?
So, yes, we have recovered to the point that we actually need construction workers now in the industry. So the June numbers from the BLS shows that there are 334,000 open jobs in construction. So this includes residential and non-residential. It's cooling off. The labor market is cooling off. Last month, the job openings rate were over 400,000. So it's cooling off, but we still need over 300,000 people joining the construction trades, right?
Yeah.
So, attracting skilled labor is a main objective for our builders. And at NHB, along with the Home Building Institute, we've done an analysis, just to keep up with the industry growth and the people leaving the industry for retirement, because, let's face it, it's an aging labor force, right?
Right.
We need around 61,000 new hires to join the construction trades every month. Every month. Do you know anyone looking for a job? Because we need people joining the construction trades. The Great Recession, like you mentioned, was absolutely devastating, right, to the housing industry. Many left the labor force for good. Mm-hmm. And we have an aging labor force where the young people are not really interested in going into trade schools and not in the construction trade. And then we need more women, hopefully, joining the construction trades. Women make up around half of the labor force, but in construction, they make up only around 10%. And I think the last point I want to say is that, we kind of need a sensible, like a bipartisan immigration policies, even on a temporary basis, to bring in workers, because we lack workers. So what happens is if we don't have enough workers, the wages has to go up, right? Because it's an imbalance in the supply and demand. So yeah, we have recovered in the construction labor, but we really, really desperately need people to join in.
I think that's something a lot of our members managing these firms experience and have been for the last year. And it was one of the primary topics in some of our CEO roundtables at our national convention in DC this past spring, is this labor shortage. So I think everyone's feeling that pain point right now. Sticking on 2008, why should we not be afraid of another 2008?
I think there's two fundamental changes there, right? Different. In early 2000, there was a lot of overbuilding happening. There was so much activity. There was so much building happening. Mm-hmm. We just didn't need that, right?
Yeah.
Right now, what has happened is the fact that, the Great Recession was absolutely devastating the housing industry. We are actually at an underbuilding at this point. This last decade, between 2010 to 2020, we are severely underbuilt just to keep up with the population demand.
Right.
So we have at NHB, we estimate the housing deficit to be around 1 million units. Freddie Mac estimates it to be like 3.8 million units. So it's a staggering number, right? We need to we have a deficit. We need to be building around 1.5 to 2 million units for housing, but we are not anywhere close to that. So that's the biggest difference, the housing deficit. And also on the lending standards. There was a lot of loose lending, right?
Yeah.
Before the Great Recession happened.
Yeah.
So now it has completed. It's different. It's much different. They are very strict about the lending standards. So we don't expect the bubble to burst. But there are exceptions too. There were some markets that might experience price declines. But this is not going to be a national phenomenon like we saw in 2008.
Great. All right. Are there any market signs that we should be watching or our members should be on the lookout for?
I would say just be cautious, just be cautious until 2024. Housing is a very interest rate sensitive industry. Sure, it is showing weaknesses right now, but I think as the economy slows and as it recovers, I think the housing will become a leading indicator, leading the economy out of this slowdown as well. So it's a very business cycle kind of, the housing and the business cycle goes hand in hand. Right. So I would say watch out for the numbers. The HMI is a great number to look at, the housing market index, because it's a forward-looking indicator. And the housing starts, that shows, like how much for the next 12 months, what we are expecting. And I would say, pay attention to the demographics too. Right. Because for the next 10 years, each will show that, that the millennials are driving this huge demand. But then what happens when the Gen Zs come? What happens when the Alpha Gen comes? Because they are much smaller population cohorts compared to the millennials, right? So that means that the demand for housing is going to be less when they come out of age and wanting houses. So it's just something to think about,
So as we start to wrap up here, I did have a couple off-the-cuff questions that you and I had actually discussed that I think our members would find very interesting. We talked about the migration trend out of these urban areas into these suburban locations. And one I found interesting was there was a mention of Western migration into the mountains and into Colorado and Idaho. And there was such a trend there. What's going on there now? Is it still hot or not?
I think Apple and Google and Twitter are putting a stop to that, right? I just saw Apple saying that 3 days mandatory in the office starting September 5th. So that the big companies, Tesla, Elon Musk told people to quit, leave Tesla if they don't want to work in the office a minimum 40 hours, right? So I think people need to come back to the office. So that means, like Idaho saw the largest population growth in any state in 2021. People were migrating to Boise, especially. That drove up the home prices there. But now that the people need to go back to offices, it's going to change. That migration, people need to go back to their normal pre-pandemic lives again. So, it'll be really interesting. I'll be really interested to see the population data when it comes out early next year for 2022 to see which states and metro areas lost more of the population. I bet it's going to be those mountain states that people are just going to go back. So
very interesting. And we will make sure to keep an eye on that as well. I also wanted to make sure our members knew about the HBGI that NAHB has as a resource. Is that something that you could just tell our members about briefly, that they know they can access it and what it's actually telling them?
Yeah, so this is what we did for the Home Building Geography Index. We took all the permit data from every county in the U.S. and aggregated it according to population cuts. So there are 7 regions. So this was really awesome for us because when the pandemic happened, it really showed us that the migration from the high density areas away from them to the more outer suburbs and the more rural areas were growing. But now the shift is back again. Now the cities and the urban areas, the permits are getting higher in those areas again. So we can see the patterns of the home building, what's happening across the country. It's on our website, nhb.org. If you go to the econ tab, we have all these indexes, plus, the HMI, the affordability index. We have such great resources. Do check it out, and if anybody has questions, feel free to email us.
Awesome information and a very valuable resource as well. Final question, as companies look forward to the forecast, is there anything else you can share with us about what's next for the 18 months ahead in the housing market?
I think even if we are in a kind of a downturn right now, we do expect the housing sector to recover in 2024. We are forecasting over 1 million single-family units and around 520,000 multifamily starts in 2024. Yeah, so it's going to be a couple of two this year. Next year will be slower, but 2024 we expect the housing market to go back to trend.
Okay, great. So hang on to 2024 is what I'm hearing.
Yes, be optimistic.
That's right. So that is about all the time we have for today. But before we sign off, I did want to mention for our listeners about another upcoming event we have. We've almost wrapped up the agenda for the last stop of our 2022 private symposium tour. We're looking to focus solely on the energy market this time, and we'll be traveling to Houston, Texas on Tuesday, November 15th for a half day of programming from about 7:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And it'll be held just south of the energy corridor in Houston. We'll have industry experts to discuss overall economic landscape for the energy market, followed by a deeper dive into EV, energy storage, hydrogen, ESG, and renewables, both solar and wind. So we're still finalizing details, but if you're interested, we'll provide a link to the event page in the show notes. We hope to have registration open this week if you're listening today, or you can subscribe as well to the private market industry briefs, and you'll be notified when registration opens. We are limiting this to under 100 attendees to encourage networking, so you will want to make sure you register soon. Again, thank you, Danushka, for providing your very knowledgeable market insight to us today.
Thank you so much, Diana. It's been so awesome. Thank you so much for having me again, too.
Absolutely. And hopefully we will take another look in 2023.
Can't wait.
Absolutely. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on another Engineering Influence podcast from ACEC. Talk to you soon.